Hello everyone, this is Shivani and welcome back to my channel Lit Fun. Today we'll be discussing the second chapter of the book First Flight, that is Nelson Mandela, A Long Walk to Freedom. So without further ado, let's get started. You all must have heard about the name Nelson Mandela. We all know that he's a political leader of the country South Africa. But what about its tagline, A Long Walk to Freedom? What is it? Well, it's the autobiography of Nelson Mandela. And this chapter is just a snippet, a short portion from the same autobiography. Now the question comes, why is it named so? It's named so because it was indeed a long journey till they achieved freedom. Because it took more than 300 years for the black Africans to get free. In fact, Nelson Mandela himself got 80 plus years of age fighting for the freedom. So it took him a long time to finally gain freedom, and thus he named his autobiography as A Long Walk to Freedom. All this is fine, but from what did Nelson Mandela wanted to get freedom? Was it from the colonizers, the Britishers, just like we Indians fought? No. Well, he wanted to have freedom from apartheid. Now, what is apartheid? Apartheid means racial discrimination. What is racial discrimination? It means discrimination on the basis of skin color. Basically, काले और गोरे का भेद, इसको हम कहते हैं apartheid. And this was a prominent problem in South Africa. So, South Africa में कुछ white South Africans थे और कुछ blacks थे, और ब्लैक्स के साथ बहुत ज़्यादा इनजस्टिस होता था. उनसे स्लेवरी कराई जाती थी, उनके कोई ह्यूमन राइट्स नहीं थे, कोई सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट नहीं थी, कोई डिग्निटी नहीं थी. सो दे वर ट्रीटेड वेरी बैडली जस्ट लाइक एनिमल्स. नाउ दैट वी आर अवेयर of the political condition of South Africa at that time, let us discuss in detail who was Nelson Mandela. Well, he was the member of African National Congress. He fought for the equal rights of black people, and for this he spent 30 years in prison. But finally he got successful and he became the first black president of South Africa, thus putting an end to apartheid, to racial discrimination forever. Now finally comes the inauguration ceremony where Nelson Mandela would take oath as the president of South Africa. And this is the point from where your second chapter of First Flight book begins. So now pay more attention and listen attentively. First thing that you need to remember is the date. That is 10th May 1994. So the inauguration ceremony took place on 10th May 1994, where in the Union's building amphitheater, and that was in Pretoria. So just like we have Delhi, South Africa had Pretoria, and in there was a building named as Union Building. उस यूनियन बिल्डिंग के अंदर जैसे हमारा ऑडिटोरियम्स होते हैं, उसके अंदर एक एम्फी थिएटर था, विच मीन्स ओपन रूफ्ड. ओके, जिसकी छत नहीं होती, ओपन में जो ऑडिटोरियम्स होते हैं, दैट आर नोन एज एम्फी थिएटर. सो प्रिटोरिया में यूनियन बिल्डिंग्स के एम्फी थिएटर में ये इनॉग्रेशन सेरेमनी हुई थी. हु वर द पार्टिसिपेंट्स? Well, all the politicians and dignitaries of more than 140 countries had arrived for this inauguration ceremony. So it was a historic event, like really huge event. सिर्फ साउथ अफ्रीका के बड़े बड़े लोग नहीं थे, बल्कि over 140 countries के politicians and all the dignified people were present there. And obviously South Africans तो वहाँ पर थे ही. Now let's understand the key phrases used in this chapter. The first one is white supremacy. Now, Nelson Mandela says that now there would be no more white supremacy. What does it mean? No more rule of white people or no more discrimination on the hands of white people. तो अब तक वहाँ पर white government थी, पर अब एक black president वहाँ पर बन चुका था, तो अब जो white supremacy थी वो खत्म हो गई थी. And second is the rainbow gathering. What does it mean? Just like we have different colors in rainbow, Similarly, there were people of different color present over there. तो वहाँ पर white people भी थे, black people भी थे, and you know that we have a lot of skin colors. So we have whitish complexion, brunettes are there, dark brown skin tone, light brown skin tone. तो क्योंकि वहाँ पर 140 over 140 country के लोग present थे and South Africans थे, so there were people of all the races, people of all the colors. Okay, so Nelson Mandela terms it as rainbow gathering. Now let's discuss some key points from Nelson Mandela's historic speech. Nelson Mandela uses a few very important terms in his speech. Now let's discuss them one by one. The first one is extraordinary human disaster. And this is very important from your exam point of view as well, because the question has come several times asking what does it mean. So, extraordinary human disaster refers to apartheid, that is, discrimination against black people by the hands of whites. So, we have already discussed that white people treated black very poorly, just like animals. They robbed them of their dignity, of their freedom, of their human rights. So, this was the human disaster. Next, he uses another important term, that is glorious human achievement. So what was the human achievement? It was the formation of democratic non-racial government. और ये democratic non-racial government बनी कैसे थी? It became because Nelson Mandela became the first black president ever. So because Nelson Mandela president बने, white supremacy end हो गई. Black people were there in the government now. So this was a great, glorious human achievement. Okay. And how do we know that it was democratic and non-racial? Because Nelson Mandela was a great man. Okay, he did not want to take revenge or anything. So, national anthems were played on that inauguration ceremony, which is very obvious, very common. National anthem would be played, but there were two national anthems that were played. This is important. One national anthem was of white people and another one was of black people. So he respected both the races and he valued them, and he played the national anthem for both of them. So this means that obviously he would value the rights of black people, but he would also maintain a dignified stand for the white people as well. Okay, so because he became the president, democratic non-racial government was established, which was the glorious human achievement, and it ended the extraordinary human disaster that was apartheid forever. Apart from that, Nelson Mandela gets really emotional and he feels really proud because they were considered as outlaws earlier. Okay, outlaws means कुछ अलग ही type के, मतलब बाहर के लोग. They were not considered as like proper citizens of South Africa. They were treated like criminals if they protested, if they fought for their rights. And Nelson Mandela, we all know, had to spend 30 years in the prison. But today, these people were given so much respect. They were hosting all the international readers on their ground. So they were hosting such a big ceremony, and all the international guests from 140 countries had graced them with their presence. So this was a huge moment for him. And he thanked all the international leaders for coming there and, giving them their approval, accepting the black people. As Nelson Mandela says, that it is now the common victory for justice, peace and human dignity. Further, he says that now they have achieved political emancipation, that means political freedom from all kinds of restriction. And he takes a pledge that now he would make sure that all South Africans are free from poverty, deprivation, suffering and discrimination. Whether it is racial discrimination, gender discrimination or any other sort of discrimination, it would now not prevail in South Africa. वहाँ कोई discrimination नहीं होगी, कोई गरीबी नहीं रहेगी और कोई suffering नहीं होगी. Then Nelson Mandela thanked all the other leaders who fought for the freedom of South Africans, who fought against the system of apartheid. Some of them are Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Yusuf Dadoo and Bram Fisher. There are many other names, and Mandela thanked all of them, and he also expresses his regret that they are not alive to witness what their efforts have brought about. So they are not here to celebrate the success, but I thank them for all their contribution. And he praises them, saying that these were the men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. Then he says a very, very important line, that it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. Which basically means depths of oppression is that they were so brutally oppressed, that they were treated so brutally, they were imprisoned, they were tortured. And when we, experience so much pressure, maybe then it is that we come up with a greater force. Like, take an example of a soda bottle, very, very simple example. So any soda bottle is, when it's closed, it has a lid on it, उस पर ढक्कन लगा होता है, so it is being oppressed. हम उसकी अंदर की जो गैस है उसको नहीं स्पेस दे रहे हैं कि वो अपने आप को एक्सपैंड कर सके, फ्रीली एक्सप्रेस कर सके. वी हैव कंप्रेस्ड इट इनटू अ स्मॉल बॉटल. लेकिन शायद वही एक रीज़न है कि हमने उसको इतना दबा के रखा है कि जब हम वो लिड हटाते हैं तो वो एकदम से पूरा का पूरा फाउंटेन के रूप में वो बाहर आ जाता है विथ सच अ ग्रेट फोर्स. So maybe that when we are oppressed is that we come out more alive and as a better human being. Take our example. Till the time we are living a comfortable life, we do not feel the need to do something extraordinary. You can take example of so many people, like let's say Mahatma Gandhi or Rani Lakshmibai, or if you have even seen the movie Gangubai. All these people, they were able to fight for others, they were able to bring about a change, because at that time the conditions were really brutal. इन सब लोगों ने कुछ बहुत बुरा फेस किया था, बहुत टॉर्चर्स फेस किए थे, बहुत सफ़र किया था, और उसकी वजह से उनके अंदर इतनी करेज आई कि वो अपने लिए ही नहीं, अपने लोगों के लिए भी लड़ सके. एंड दे प्रूव टू बी सच ग्रेट पीपल विथ सो मच विजडम, सो मच ब्रेवरी, सो मच करेज, एंड सो मच endurance, and so much will to sacrifice for others. And these are the people that Nelson Mandela refers to as people with the great character. So he says that even though they faced lot of brutal circumstances, but maybe it was necessary, क्योंकि सोना जितना आग में तपता है उतना वो खरा होता है, उतना ज़्यादा वो प्योर होता है. And all these people like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Yusuf Dedu, these all also faced oppression, but then they turned out to be men of extraordinary courage and a great character. Then he also says that his country is rich in minerals and everything, but the greatest wealth of his country lies in his people, who are truer and finer than diamonds. And absolutely, this is true, because human resource is the most important. And it's very important for a leader to realize that the true wealth of his country lies in his people. Next, Mandela tells us the true meaning of courage. According to him, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. You can remember it with the Mountain Dew ad, okay? So like they say, गला सबका सूखता है, डर सबको लगता है, पर डर के आगे जीत है. And that same view was that of Nelson Mandela. Everyone feels afraid, and it's totally fine. But when we win over our fear, is then that we truly, truly possess courage, we truly portray courage. So, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. And similarly, who are brave people? Brave men are not the ones who do not fear anything, but they are the ones who achieve triumph over their fear. After that, we get to know about Nelson Mandela's ideas on love and hate. He says that people must learn to hate, because when a child is born, he hates no one. He is clear of all the prejudices. If you go near a child with a smile and extend your arms towards him, it will gladly come to you. है ना, आप उसको हंसाओगे और वो बच्चा बहुत खुश हो जाएगा और वो आपके पास आएगा. ही इज़ कम्प्लीटली इनोसेंट. It is later that he grows up in the society and we teach him कि ये लोअर कास्ट है, ये अपर कास्ट है, ये काला है, ये गोरा है. We tell him all the differences between people. We tell him how to discriminate and how to hate. So Mandela says that people must learn to hate. They are not born with hatred. And if they can learn to hate, they can definitely be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart. We are born with love, and thus it's very easy that people can learn to love. And then he says that man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. It shows his immense faith in humanity, in goodness. And he gives an example that when his jailers or when the policemen, they were torturing him, they would beat him up, he would, see a flash of discomfort, a flash of pain, in their eyes. Even if it was just for a second, but he would definitely feel it कि they were also not happy torturing the prisoners. And that just that second, that of flicker of pain or discomfort was enough to reassure Mandela that goodness exists. After that, Mandela talks about a man's twin's obligations. Twin obligation means double duties. So, one of the two duties lies towards his family, which includes parents, wife, and children, and the other duty is towards people, community, and country. But then he says that in a country like South Africa, if a man of color, that means if a black man, tried to even live as a human being, he was punished and isolated. So he could not even think of fulfilling both of his duties. Because if a person tried to fulfill his duty towards his country, means that he was trying to fight against the current system, he was trying to fight against the injustice, and the people in power would definitely not let them do it. They had So the fighters, the protesters had to live a life of secrecy and rebellion. And the same happened with Mandela as well. We have already discussed that he spent 30 years in prison. So when he tried to fight for the freedom, when he tried to fight against apartheid, he was ripped away from his family, and as a result, he could never ever fulfill his duty towards them. Next, Mandela says that he wasn't born with the hunger to be free, and he discusses the idea of freedom that he experienced at different stages of his life. In his childhood, or you can say in his boyhood, according to him, the freedom was just the freedom to be able to run in fields, swim in clear stream, roast mealies under the stars, and ride slow moving bulls. So basically, if he was allowed to have fun and play games, then he felt that he was absolutely free. And he says that till the time he was obeying his father and following his tribal customs, everything was sorted and he did not face any kind of trouble. Then he grew up, and as a student, he wanted freedom. The meaning of the freedom changed, but it was still very limited, and he wanted freedom only for himself. Then the freedom meant the liberty to go for a night out, to stay out late at night, to read what he wanted, and to visit to the places that he desired. And all these were again temporary or transitory freedoms. But later, when he grew up to be a young man, then he realized that the people were not free. Not only him, but all the people who looked like him, that means all the black people, they were chained. Because then he understood that the true meaning of freedom was to achieve your complete potential. It was the freedom to be able to earn, to marry and have a family, to live with dignity and self respect. And thus, when he realized that freedom of all the blacks was curtailed, is then that a hunger to be free born within him, and he decided to join the African National Congress and fight against the system of apartheid. Once he decided to fight, obviously he encountered several challenges that led him to reform in a great deal. And so he tells us about his reformation. He was transformed from a frightened young man into a bold one. from a law abiding attorney into a criminal, from a family loving husband to a man with no family. Like I told you, he was ripped apart from his family, and thus he could not fulfill his duty towards them. And from a life loving man, he became like a monk. Finally, he expresses his views on the oppressor and oppressed. Nelson Mandela was a great man, and in his views, we find no hatred, no ill feelings, no hard grudges towards the oppressor. If you're confused what is oppressor and oppressed, let me clarify. ऑप्रेसर वो इंसान है जो आपको दबाता है, जो इनजस्टिस करता है. इन दिस केस ऑप्रेसर वर द वाइट पीपल. और ऑप्रेस्ड, ईडी, ऑप्रेस्ड कौन है? जिनको दबाया जाता है, जो बहुत टॉर्चर सफ़र करते हैं, इनजस्टिस सफ़र करते हैं, विच इन दिस केस वर द ब्लैक पीपल. But Nelson Mandela says that none of them was free. Both oppressor and oppressed were chained, they were not free. Why? Because he feels that oppressor is a man who takes away another man's freedom. और जो दूसरे की आज़ादी छीन लेता है, दूसरे की फ्रीडम छीन लेता है, वो खुद भी कभी फ्री नहीं हो सकता, because he is a prisoner of hatred. एंड हेट्रेड इज़ नॉट अ गुड फीलिंग. वो कभी आपको खुशी नहीं देगी, वो कभी आपको चैन से जीने नहीं देगी, आपको आज़ाद नहीं होने देगी. सो ऑप्रेसर्स आर द प्रिजनर्स ऑफ हेट्रेड एंड इवन दे आर नॉट फ्री. He says that they are locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Just imagine if we know that Nelson Mandela was a great man of great wisdom, great courage, great character, and there must be several others. जस्ट इमेजिन अगर उनके अंदर ये प्रेजुडिस नहीं होता कि ब्लैक पीपल इन्फीरियर है, अगर उनकी ये छोटी सोच नहीं होती, नैरो माइंडेडनेस नहीं होती, तो शायद वो कितने अमेजिंग अमेजिंग फ्रेंड्स बना सकते थे, उनसे कितना कुछ सीख सकते थे इफ़ दे हैड इंटरेक्टेड विद दोज पीपल, एंड मे बी दे कुड हैव डेवलप्ड साउथ अफ्रीका टू सम अदर लेवल. बट वो अपनी इस छोटी सोच का, अपने प्रेजुडिसेस का शिकार थे, एंड दे कुड नेवर बी फ्री, and they were losing out on a lot of things. Okay, so he says that a man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He's locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness, and he needs to be made free. उसको हमें आज़ाद करना पड़ेगा. ऑप्रेस्ड को तो हमें आज़ाद करना ही है, ब्लैक पीपल को तो हमें आज़ाद करना ही है. दे आर सफरिंग सो मच, बट एट द सेम टाइम oppressor white people also need to be liberated, because they are also chained in the bars of hatred. And then at last he says that both the oppressor and oppressed are robbed of their humanity. Obviously जिस पर इतना ज़्यादा टॉर्चर हो रहा है, their souls will always be scarred. वो कभी नहीं भूल पाएंगे उनके साथ जो इनजस्टिस हुआ, जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हुई, जो भी उन्होंने सफ़र किया. कुछ एक अंदर से उनके अंदर इट टूट जाता होगा, मर जाता होगा. सो दे आर कम्प्लीटली रॉब्ड ऑफ देयर ह्यूमैनिटी. और जो इतना बुरा काम कर रहा है, कैन यू रियली कॉल हिम अ ह्यूमन? बिकॉज उसने तो ह्यूमैनिटी छोड़ ही दी है ना. दैट्स वाई ही इज़ being able to torture the other person so much. So at the end we find oppressor and oppressed to be at the same level, and both have been robbed of their humanity. With this, he ends his speech. However, he does say in the beginning, and he does believe that although it will take years to forget this hurt, but he will make sure that South Africa will never ever again face the discrimination of any kind. With a lot of efforts, they have finally achieved freedom, they have finally achieved equal rights for everyone, and they'll make sure that the people will now live together in harmony without any discrimination or any suffering of any kind. So with this, we have come to an end of the chapter. I hope you found it interesting and useful, and if you have any doubts, you can put them down in the comment section. I'll definitely get back to you. Till then, have a nice day, keep learning, and all the best for your upcoming exams.